What if I told you that being excluded from your own father's will was actually the best thing that ever happened to you? My stepfamily thought they'd inherited millions until I walked into that lawyer's office with documents they never knew existed. But here's the twist they definitely didn't see coming. Dad had been planning this for months, and I wasn't the only secret child he'd been hiding. Stick around because this family drama is about to get very expensive. For all the wrong people. They said I wasn't allowed in the room. Family only, they said. Funny thing is, I was his firstborn son. My name is Ethan Parker, and this is the story of how my stepfamily tried to steal my father's legacy. Until I walked into that lawyer's office with proof they never saw coming. Picture this, a mahogany conference table, expensive leather chairs, and 5 people who thought they'd already won. My stepmother, Olivia, sat at the head like she owned the place. Her kids, Haley and Aiden, flanked her side, smug grins plastered across their faces. The family lawyer, Harold, shuffled through documents, avoiding eye contact with me. Mr. Parker, Harold cleared his throat. As I explained on the phone, this reading is for immediate family members only. The will specifically states... I held up my hand. Before you finish that sentence, Harold, there's something you need to see. The room went dead silent. Olivia's face drained of color as I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a manila envelope. Not just any envelope, one with my father's handwriting across the front. For Ethan, when the time comes. You see, I said, placing it on that polished table, while you were all planning Dad's funeral, I was discovering he'd been planning something else entirely. Haley leaned forward, her voice cracking. What is that? I smiled, the kind of smile that comes when you've been underestimated your whole life and you're finally about to prove them wrong. Legal documents, property deeds, and a video message that's going to change everything you thought you knew about my father's estate. Olivia shot up from her chair. This is ridiculous. James never mentioned any separate arrangements. He wouldn't what protect his real son? The words hung in the air like a challenge. That's when I opened the envelope and their perfect little world started crumbling. But let me back up. This story doesn't start in that conference room. It starts 5 years ago in the same house where I grew up, but everything had changed. I was 28 then, fresh out of business school, full of ideas about expanding Dad's real estate company. See, James Parker wasn't just my father. He was a legend in our small Ohio town. 40 years building Parker Properties, from nothing into the biggest development firm in 3 counties. The last real conversation we ever had was in his office. I can still smell the coffee getting cold on his desk, still see the blueprints scattered everywhere. I'd spent months preparing my pitch. Mixed-use developments, affordable housing integrated with commercial spaces, green building standards, the future of real estate. Dad, the market's changing, I told him, spreading my research across his desk. People want sustainability. They want community. We could be pioneers. He barely looked up from his paperwork. Ethan, you're thinking too big, too complicated. We build what sells. Period. But Dad, no buts. His voice cut through the room like a blade. You want to save the world. Go join the Peace Corps. You want to run this business? You do it my way. That's when Olivia walked in. Dad's second wife of 3 years, with her perfectly styled blonde hair and that smile that never reached her eyes. Behind her trailed Haley and Aiden, her kids from her first marriage. Suddenly, they were everywhere, in my family's business. James, honey, Olivia purred. Aiden has some wonderful ideas about that new subdivision. Don't you want to hear them? And just like that, I became invisible in my own father's office. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. I'd secured a meeting with the city council about sustainable development incentives. Months of work. Then I found out Dad had sent Aiden in my place. Aiden, who'd barely graduated high school representing Parker Properties to the city. You undermined me, I confronted Dad that night. In front of the whole council. I made a business decision, he replied, not even looking up from his dinner. Aiden understands our company's direction. Our company. Since when is it our company? I'm your son. The silence that followed was deafening. Olivia set down her fork. Haley and Aiden exchanged glances. And my father finally looked at me. Ethan, maybe it's time you found your own path. Those 7 words ended everything. I packed my bags that night and moved to Denver, built my own real estate firm from scratch. Commercial properties, sustainable developments, everything Dad said wouldn't work. Except it did work. Within 3 years, I was pulling in more revenue than Parker Properties ever had, but success couldn't fill the hole my father's rejection had left behind. I threw myself into work. 60-hour weeks became 80-hour weeks. I dated, but nothing stuck. How could it? I was carrying around this weight, this need to prove myself to a man who had already chosen his new family over me. The calls from home became holidays. Only then, just Christmas, then nothing at all. Maya, my childhood friend who still lived in town, kept me updated through occasional texts. Your dad asks about you, she'd write, but he never called himself. Then last Tuesday, my phone rang at 6 a.m. Maya's name on the screen. Ethan, her voice was shaky. You need to sit down. Your dad, he had a heart attack yesterday. He's gone. The world stopped. 5 years of anger, 5 years of distance, and suddenly none of it mattered. James Parker was dead, and the last words we'd spoken were in anger. I booked the first flight home. The flight back felt like falling through time. 3 hours in the air, but it might as well have been 3 lifetimes. When I landed in Columbus, the Ohio sky was doing that thing it does in November. Gray clouds hanging low, threatening rain, but never quite delivering. Maya picked me up at the airport. One look at her face told me everything I needed to know about how bad things had gotten. He went fast, she said, as we drove through familiar streets that somehow felt foreign. Heart attack at the office. Olivia found him when she came to bring lunch. At least he went doing what he loved, I said, though the words tasted hollow. Ethan, Maya's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. There's something else about the funeral arrangements. My stomach dropped. What about them? Olivia planned everything. The service, the burial, the reception. She didn't call you. I stared out the window at the strip malls and gas stations of my childhood. She didn't call me for my own father's funeral. I tried to get your number to her. She said the family would handle notifications. The family. There it was again. The invisible line that had been drawn 5 years ago, and I was still on the wrong side of it. We pulled into the driveway of what used to be my family home. Except it wasn't anymore. The blue shutters I'd helped Dad paint when I was 16 were now pristine white. The old oak tree where I'd built a treehouse was gone, replaced by some designer landscaping that probably cost more than most people's cars. Olivia answered the door like she was greeting a stranger, which I guess in her mind I was. Ethan. Her voice was flat, emotionless. I wasn't sure you'd come. He was my father, of course. She stepped aside, but barely. We've been handling all the arrangements. The service is tomorrow at 2. I walked into the living room where I'd opened Christmas presents for 18 years. Every piece of furniture was different. Every photo on the wall showed Olivia's perfect new family. Haley and Aiden lounged on a cream-colored sofa that probably cost more than my first car. Where are Dad's things? I asked. We've been sorting through everything, Olivia said, like she was discussing the weather. Donating what we can, keeping what's meaningful to the family. There was that word again. Family. I'd like to see his office. Oh, Olivia's perfect composure cracked just slightly. We've already cleaned it out. Business papers, you know. Very boring stuff. Haley looked up from her phone. Besides, Mom's turning it into a yoga studio. The room went quiet. Even Aiden shot his sister a look that said she'd gone too far. A yoga studio, I repeated slowly. Well, the space was just sitting there empty, Olivia said, recovering quickly. James would have wanted it used for something positive. That's when Maya cleared her throat behind me. I'd forgotten she was even there. Actually, Olivia, I think there might be some legal things Ethan needs to handle. You know, with the will reading and everything. Olivia's spine straightened. The will reading is Thursday at 2. Harold will be handling everything. Family members only, of course. Of course I'll be there, I said. I'm his son. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Olivia exchanged a glance with Aiden that lasted just a second too long. Well, she said finally, Harold will explain all the legal requirements. I'm sure you understand with estate law being so complicated. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The message was clear. They didn't want me there. I looked around that room one more time, at the family photos that didn't include me, at the furniture that erased every trace of the life my father and I had shared, at the faces of people who saw me as an outsider in my own family's home. I'll see you Thursday, I said and walked toward the door. As Maya and I drove away, something was nagging at me. The way Olivia had rushed to mention cleaning out Dad's office. The way Aiden had looked uncomfortable when his sister mentioned the yoga studio. The way none of them could quite meet my eyes. They were hiding something, and Thursday's will reading was going to be their big reveal. Except I was starting to suspect that Dad might have had a few surprises of his own. That night, lying in my hotel room, I kept thinking about something Maya had mentioned on the drive. Dad had been spending a lot of time at the office in his final months. Working late, coming in on weekends. Olivia had complained about it constantly. What had he been working on that was so important? And why did I get the feeling I was about to find out? I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Dad's office being transformed into Olivia's yoga studio. By Thursday morning, I'd had maybe 2 hours of rest and way too much hotel coffee. The funeral was surreal. A packed church full of people who remembered James Parker as a pillar of the community, while his own son sat in the back row like a stranger. Olivia had orchestrated everything perfectly. She played the grieving widow, beautifully accepting condolences with just the right amount of dignified sorrow. I watched from the back as business partners and old friends filed past the casket, people who'd known my father for decades. Some of them looked around, probably wondering where I was. But Olivia had made sure the family seating was full. No room for outsiders. After the service, Maya found me in the parking lot. "This is wrong," she said, anger flashing in her eyes. "You should have been up there with them." "It doesn't matter now." "Like hell it doesn't." "Hurry." She pulled out her car keys. "There's something I need to show you. Something I should have mentioned yesterday." We drove to the Parker Properties office building, the same brick building where I'd spent countless afternoons as a kid, watching Dad work deals and build his empire. Maya had a key. She'd been Dad's assistant for the past 3 years. "Olivia had me box up everything from his office last week," Maya said as we climbed the stairs. "But she never asked about the basement storage unit. Dad had a storage unit. Personal files, stuff he didn't want in the main office." She stopped at a door marked Storage E205. "He made me promise to keep the key safe, said someday it might be important." The storage unit was small, cramped, and filled with boxes labeled in Dad's precise handwriting. Tax records 2019, property deeds, legal documents. But one box caught my attention. It was newer than the others, and written across the top in Dad's hand, "Ethan, emergency only." "Maya, did Dad ever mention this box to you?" She shook her head. "He came down here a lot the last few months, though. Sometimes on weekends. Always alone." I opened the box with shaking hands. Inside were documents I'd never seen before. Property deeds with my name on them. Legal papers establishing something called the E205 Trust, and at the bottom, a flash drive with a note taped to it. "Play this when they try to shut you out." "Dad." "What the hell?" I whispered. Maya leaned over my shoulder as I rifled through the documents. "Ethan, look at these property transfers. The Riverside plot, the downtown commercial building, the old Miller farm. These are some of your dad's biggest holdings. And they're all in my name." I held up deed after deed. Transferred to the E205 Trust 18 months ago, before he got sick. My hands were shaking as I plugged the flash drive into Maya's laptop. A video file appeared on the desktop. I clicked play, and suddenly my father's face filled the screen. He looked tired, older than I remembered, but his eyes were clear and determined. "Ethan," his recorded voice said, "if you're watching this, it means I'm gone and they tried to cut you out of the will reading." I figured as much. I sank into a chair. Maya grabbed my shoulder. "Son, I made a lot of mistakes. The biggest one was letting Olivia convince me you didn't want to be part of this family anymore. But a father knows his child, and I knew you'd be back someday." The video continued. "The properties in that box represent about 60% of Parker Properties' real assets. I transferred them to a trust in your name because I wanted to make sure you got what was rightfully yours, no matter what Olivia tried to pull." My throat felt tight. "Dad, the downtown building is worth $2.8 million alone. The Riverside development plot, well, you always had better vision for that land than I did. Maybe it's time someone actually built something meaningful there." He leaned forward in the video, and for a moment it felt like he was right there in the room with me. "I also want you to know that I kept track of what you built in Denver. I'm proud of you, son, prouder than I ever told you. You proved that your ideas work. You proved you didn't need me to succeed, but that doesn't mean you should have to." The video was only 5 minutes long, but it changed everything. As his image faded to black, I sat there staring at the blank screen, trying to process what I'd just learned. "Ethan," Maya said softly, "do you understand what this means?" I looked down at the documents spread across the table. Property deeds, trust papers, transfer agreements, all legal, all legitimate, all proving that my father had never stopped being my father even when I thought he'd replaced me. It means Olivia doesn't control as much as she thinks she does. I stood up gathering the papers. And it means Thursday's will reading is going to be very different than she planned. But as I loaded everything back into the box, one more document caught my eye. A letter addressed to someone named Leah Morrison. The return address was my father's office, dated just 3 weeks before he died. "Maya, do you know anyone named Leah Morrison?" She frowned. "No, why," I held up the letter. "Dad wrote to someone named Leah 3 weeks ago. The letter's still here, never sent." Maya's eyes widened. "Open it." The letter was short, handwritten in Dad's familiar scrawl. "Leah, I know this is long overdue, but I think it's time you met your half-brother. His name is Ethan, and he's going to need all the family he can get. I'm sorry I waited so long to make this right. Your father, James, is..." The world tilted. I read the letter 3 times before the words sank in. "I have a sister," I whispered. Maya grabbed the envelope. "Look at the address. She lives here in town. Ethan, your dad, was planning to introduce you to a sister you never knew existed." My mind reeled. A secret sister, hidden property deeds, a trust fund I knew nothing about. How many secrets had my father been keeping? And why was he planning to reveal them all just before he died? I looked at my watch. The will reading was in 2 hours. Olivia thought she was about to inherit control of Parker Properties. Haley and Aiden probably thought they were set for life. None of them had any idea what was coming. "Maya," I said, sliding the flash drive into my pocket, "I need you to do me a favor. Can you find this Leah Morrison? Tell her she needs to be at Harold's office at 2 p.m. today. You're going to bring her to the will reading." I smiled, and for the first time since Dad died, it felt genuine. Dad wanted us to meet, and something tells me Olivia's perfect little family is about to get a lot more complicated. Walking into Harold's law office at exactly 2 p.m. felt like stepping into a battlefield where the other side thought they'd already won. The receptionist looked confused when I appeared. Clearly she hadn't been expecting me. "Mr. Parker," she stammered. Mrs. Parker said that I wouldn't be coming." I smiled. "Change of plans." I could hear voices from the conference room. Olivia's laugh high and musical, Haley saying something about vacation plans, the comfortable chatter of people who thought they were about to inherit millions. Harold met me at the conference room door, his face pale with awkwardness. Ethan, I'm glad you're here, but as I explained yesterday, the will specifically designates... Harold, I interrupted. Before we start, there are some documents you need to see. I walked into that room like I owned it, because as it turned out, I kind of did. Olivia's face went through several expressions when she saw me. Surprise, annoyance, and then something that looked almost like fear. "What is he doing here?" Haley demanded. "I'm here for my father's will reading," I said, taking a seat at the table. "Same as you." "Harold," Olivia's voice was sharp. "Explain to Ethan that this is a closed proceeding." That's when I opened my briefcase and spread the property deeds across the mahogany table, like I was dealing cards. The room went dead silent. "Actually, Harold, maybe you could explain to everyone here what the E205 Trust is." Harold's face went white. "Where did you get those?" "From my father, the same place I got this." I pulled out the flash drive and set it next to the deeds. Dad left me a video message, very enlightening. Olivia stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. "This is ridiculous. James never mentioned any trust. These could be forged." "Could be?" I agreed. "Harold, are they—" The lawyer picked up the first deed with shaking hands. His eyes scanned the document, checking signatures, dates, official seals. The silence stretched until it was suffocating. "These appear to be legitimate," Harold said finally. "Appear to be—" Aiden's voice cracked. "They are legitimate," Harold corrected. "Filed with the county 18 months ago. The E205 Trust holds title to—" He shuffled through the deeds. "The Riverside Development Plot, the downtown commercial building, the Miller Farm property, and several smaller holdings." "How much—" Olivia's question came out as a whisper. Harold continued calculating. "Conservative estimate about $12 million in real estate assets." You could have heard a pin drop. Haley's mouth was hanging open. Aiden looked like he'd been punched. And Olivia looked like she was calculating how much of her future had just evaporated. "That's impossible," she said. "James would have told me about something like this." "Would he?" I asked. "The same way he told you about my sister." "Your what?" I pulled out the unsent letter and placed it on the table. Dad was planning to introduce me to my half-sister. Someone named Leah Morrison. Ring any bells? The color drained from Olivia's face completely. "How did you—" "So you do know about her." "I don't know what game you're playing, Ethan, but this isn't a game." I stood up, and for the first time in 5 years, I felt like I had the power in a room with my stepfamily. "This is my father finally making things right." That's when the conference room door opened and Maya walked in with a woman I'd never seen before. She was tall with dark hair and eyes that looked exactly like Dad's. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd learned to stand on her own. "Sorry I'm late," Maya said. "Harold, this is Leah Morrison." The room erupted. "Who the hell is this?" Haley demanded. "What's going on here?" Aiden was looking back and forth between me and the stranger, but Olivia just stared at Leah like she was seeing a ghost. "You're not supposed to be here." "Excuse me." Leah's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. "Leah," I said, standing up. "I'm Ethan. I think we have a lot to talk about." She looked at me for a long moment, and I could see her putting pieces together. "You're James's son, the one who moved to Denver." "You knew about me. He talked about you all the time." Her voice was soft. "He missed you." Olivia slammed her hand down on the table. "This is insane. Harold, you cannot allow random people to disrupt a legal proceeding." "Actually," Harold said, clearing his throat, "if Ms. Morrison is indeed James' daughter, she may have legal standing here." "She's not his daughter," Olivia snapped. "She's nobody, a mistake from years ago that should have stayed buried." The words hung in the air like a slap. Leah's face went rigid, but she didn't back down. "A mistake." Leah's voice was dangerously quiet. "Is that what you told him I was—" "Olivia," I said, "did you know about Leah when you married my father?" This is none of your business. Did you know he had another child? She's not his child, Olivia's composure finally cracked. She's the result of some fling he had in college. Ancient history. Ancient history with a birth certificate, Leah said, pulling a document from her purse. And DNA test results. And 18 years of Christmas cards from a father who never stopped caring about me. She placed the documents on the table next to my property deeds. Harold examined them with the same careful attention he'd given my trust papers. These appear legitimate as well, he said finally. This is a setup, Haley said. They planned this together. Actually, I said, until about 3 hours ago, I didn't know Leah existed. Just like she apparently didn't know I'd been cut out of the family. Leah looked around the room, taking in the hostile faces. James called me 2 weeks before he died. He said he was planning to make some changes, that he wanted to fix old mistakes. What kind of changes? Harold asked. He said he'd been unfair to his son, that he'd let other people influence his decisions. Leah's eyes found Olivia. He wanted to make amends. Olivia laughed, but it sounded hollow. This is pathetic. 2 bitter children trying to rewrite history because they didn't get enough attention. Attention? I stood up again, anger finally breaking through my control. I built a multi-million-dollar company from nothing while you convinced my father I was worthless. Leah became an environmental scientist while you pretended she didn't exist. We didn't need his attention, Olivia. We needed his honesty. And apparently he was finally ready to give it to us, Leah added. Harold cleared his throat. Perhaps we should proceed with the actual will reading. Then we can determine how these additional factors affect the distribution. As he opened the official will documents, I caught Leah's eye across the table. For just a moment we shared a look of understanding. 2 people who'd grown up thinking they weren't enough for James Parker, discovering that maybe he'd been planning to prove us wrong all along. But the biggest shock was still coming. Because as Harold began reading Dad's will, it became clear that the trust properties were just the beginning of what our father had hidden from his perfect second family. Harold adjusted his reading glasses and opened the leather portfolio containing Dad's will. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Olivia sat rigidly in her chair. Haley and Aiden flanked her like bodyguards, and Leah and I faced them across the table like we were negotiating a treaty. The last will and testament of James Edward Parker, Harold began, written and signed 6 months ago. 6 months. That meant Dad had written this will long after he'd established my trust. Long after he'd started trying to contact Leah. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was planned. To my wife, Olivia Parker, I leave the family home, and contents along with my personal effects and vehicles. Olivia relaxed slightly. At least she was getting the house. To my stepchildren, Haley and Aiden Morrison Parker, I leave $25,000 each to help with their college expenses and early careers. $25,000, I saw Aiden's face fall. He'd probably been expecting hundreds of thousands, maybe millions. The remainder of my estate, including all business assets, liquid investments, and properties not previously transferred to trust, I leave to be divided equally between my children, Ethan James Parker and Leah Catherine Morrison. The silence that followed was deafening. What? Haley's voice was barely a whisper. That's impossible, Olivia said, but her voice lacked conviction. Harold continued reading. I want it noted that both Ethan and Leah have proven themselves capable of building meaningful lives without relying on my wealth. This inheritance is not charity. It is recognition of their character and an investment in their futures. I looked across at Leah, who seemed as stunned as I felt. Did you know about any of this? She shook her head. When he called me 2 weeks ago, he said he wanted to include me in his will. But I thought maybe he meant a small amount. A symbolic gesture. How much are we talking about? I asked Harold. He shuffled through more papers. The business assets of Parker Properties after debts approximately $4.2 million. Liquid investments and savings approximately $1.8 million. The properties that weren't transferred to the E25 Trust approximately $2 million more. $8 million, Leah said faintly. Split between us. That's $4 million each, Aiden said like he was trying to make sense of numbers that big. Olivia stood up abruptly. This is fraud. James was manipulated, probably coerced. By whom? Harold asked. By them. She pointed at Leah and me. This woman shows up out of nowhere claiming to be his daughter. And him? She turned to me. He disappeared for 5 years and suddenly comes back expecting inheritance. I disappeared. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You pushed me out. You made it clear I wasn't welcome in this family. Because you were disrespectful to your father. I disagreed with his business strategy. That's not disrespect, that's having an opinion. Leah cleared her throat softly. Actually, I think I can explain some of this. Everyone turned to look at her. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small stack of letters tied with a ribbon. James wrote to me regularly for the past 3 years. At first, just birthday cards and Christmas greetings. But lately, longer letters. He talked about both of you. She looked at Olivia and then at me. He said he'd made mistakes, that he'd let pride and other people's opinions cloud his judgment. Other people's opinions? I asked. Leah hesitated, glancing at Olivia. He said his wife had convinced him that including me in the family would be embarrassing, a reminder of his past, and that his son had become too independent, too critical of the family business. That's not what I said, Olivia protested. Isn't it? Leah pulled out one of the letters. He wrote, Olivia thinks it's better if we keep the past in the past. She says Leah doesn't need a father at this stage in her life, and maybe she's right. And about Ethan, Olivia says he's made it clear he doesn't need this family. Maybe I should stop trying to fix things that can't be fixed. The room went quiet. I felt something crack open in my chest. All these years, I'd thought Dad had simply chosen his new family over me. But Olivia had been actively working to keep us apart. That's taken out of context, Olivia said, but her voice was weaker now. Is it? I asked. Did you tell my father that I didn't want to be part of this family? You moved to Denver without a word. After you made it clear I wasn't welcome here. I never said that. You didn't have to say it. You just had to make sure Aiden took my place in every meeting, every decision, every conversation that mattered. Haley spoke up for the first time in minutes. Mom, is this true? Did you try to keep Ethan away? I was protecting this family, Olivia said. From division, from conflict. From his own children, Leah's voice was quiet but cutting. You weren't his child, you were a complication. I have his eyes, Leah said simply. His hands, his stubborn streak when it comes to environmental issues. I have 18 years of letters where he told me about his work, his dreams, his regrets. How exactly was I not his child? I looked at Leah more closely. She was right. The resemblance was unmistakable once you looked for it. The shape of her face, the way she held her shoulders when she was making a point. She was definitely Dad's daughter. The point is, Harold interrupted, the will is legal and clear. Mr. Parker was of sound mind when he wrote it. I have the psychiatric evaluation he insisted on having done to prevent exactly this kind of challenge. He had a psychiatric evaluation, Olivia asked. He anticipated that there might be disagreement about his final wishes. He wanted to make sure no one could claim he was mentally compromised. But this is insane, Aiden said. $4 million to people who barely knew him. Barely knew him? I turned to face my stepbrother. I spent 18 years in this family. I worked in his office every summer from the time I was 14. I knew his coffee order, his favorite fishing spots, and exactly which tie he wore when he was nervous about big meetings. And I knew his favorite book was Silent Spring, Leah added. I knew he wanted to see the Northern Lights someday. I knew he regretted not finishing college, and that's why education was so important to him. We knew Dad. We'd both known him in ways that went deeper than just living in the same house or sharing a last name. Look, I said, I didn't come here expecting money. I came to say goodbye to my father. But he clearly wanted Leah and me to have these assets for a reason. What reason? Olivia demanded. I looked at the property deeds spread across the table, then at Leah, then back at Olivia. Maybe because he knew we'd actually do something meaningful with them. That's when Leah spoke up again. And what she said next changed everything. Actually, I think I know exactly what he wanted us to do. The last letter he sent me wasn't just about the will. It was about a project, something he called his legacy plan. She pulled out one more document from her purse. This one was different from the others. It looked like a business proposal. He wanted to build something on the riverside property. Not just any development, a sustainable community. Mixed income housing, green building standards, integrated commercial and residential space. My heart stopped. That was my proposal, the one he rejected 5 years ago. He kept it, Leah said. He sent me a copy. He said you'd been right all along and he'd been too proud to admit it. I stared at the familiar pages of my old presentation, now marked up with Dad's handwriting and additional notes. He wanted us to build it together, Leah continued. You with the business experience, me with the environmental expertise. He said it could be the kind of project that changes how people think about community development. This is getting ridiculous, Olivia said. You can't just waltz in here and redesign the entire town based on some fantasy project. Why not? I asked. If we own the land, if we have the capital, and if we have the vision, why not? But even as I said it, I knew there was going to be a problem. Because the riverside property wasn't just any piece of land. It was the crown jewel of Parker Properties Holdings. And something told me Olivia wasn't going to let us transform it without a fight. I should have known Olivia wouldn't go down without a fight. What I didn't expect was how dirty she was willing to play. 3 days after the will reading, Maya called me at 7 a.m. panic in her voice. Ethan, you need to get down to town hall now. What's wrong? Emergency town council meeting. Olivia's pushing through a development deal for the riverside property. She can't do that. The property's in my trust. She's claiming the trust is invalid pending legal review. And she's got Blackwood Development backing her up with lawyers. Blackwood Development. I knew that name. They were the outfit that came into small towns, built cheap luxury condos, and left behind traffic problems and environmental damage. Exactly the kind of developer Dad had always refused to work with. I threw on clothes and drove to town hall, my mind racing. The parking lot was packed, which meant word had gotten out about whatever Olivia was planning. Inside the council chamber was standing room only. I spotted Olivia at the front table with a man in an expensive suit who had to be from Blackwood. She looked confident, prepared, like she'd been planning this for weeks. Then I saw Leah near the back, taking notes and looking worried. What's the situation? I asked, sliding into the seat next to her. They're calling it a community improvement initiative, she said. 300 luxury condos, a shopping complex, and a golf course. They claim it'll bring jobs and tax revenue. And destroy the entire ecosystem of the riverside area. I tried to point that out during public comment. Olivia's lawyer said I didn't have standing to object since I'm not a local resident. The council chairman, a man named Bill Murray who'd been in Dad's high school class, called for order. We're here to consider the Blackwood Development proposal for the Riverside Tract, he announced. Mrs. Parker, you have the floor. Our Olivia stood up with practiced grace. Thank you, Bill. As you all know, my late husband James was passionate about bringing prosperity to this community. This development represents everything he dreamed of for our town's future. I almost choked. Dad would have hated everything about this plan. The Riverside luxury community will bring 300 new families to our area, along with hundreds of construction jobs and millions in tax revenue. Blackwood Development has committed to breaking ground within 60 days of approval. The Blackwood representative, who introduced himself as Richard Crane, added details about property values and economic impact. It all sounded very impressive if you ignored the part where they'd be paving over wetlands and building on floodplains. Furthermore, Olivia continued, we've already secured preliminary environmental approval from the state. This project is shovel-ready. That's when I stood up. Point of order. Bill Murray looked uncomfortable. Ethan, this isn't a formal hearing. If you have concerns, you can submit them in writing. Actually, I think the council needs to know that Mrs. Parker doesn't have the authority to approve this development. The room buzzed with murmurs. Olivia's face went red. Ethan Parker has no standing in this matter. Crane said smoothly. He's not a party to the development agreement. No, but I own the land. I pulled out copies of the trust documents and walked to the front of the room. The Riverside tract was transferred to the E205 Trust 18 months ago. I'm the sole trustee. Bill Murray examined the documents with growing confusion. These appear to be legitimate property transfers. They're under legal challenge, Crane interjected. Until the trust's validity is confirmed, Mrs. Parker retains authority as executor of the estate. That's not how trusts work, I said. Harold, you're here, right? Can you clarify? Harold Stevens stood up reluctantly from the middle of the room. The trust was properly established and funded during Mr. Parker's lifetime. It operates independently of the estate. This is a stall tactic, Olivia said. Ethan has been absent from this community for 5 years. He has no idea what's best for our town. You're right, I have been absent. But I've spent those 5 years building exactly the kind of sustainable development you're trying to prevent here. I looked around the packed room. How many of you remember my presentation to this council 5 years ago about mixed-use development, affordable housing, green building standards? A few hands went up, including Bill Murray's. My father rejected that vision then, but apparently he reconsidered. That's when Leah stood up. May I address the council? You don't live here, Haley called out from the front row. No, but I'm an environmental scientist. And I'm James Parker's daughter. The room erupted in surprised chatter. Clearly not everyone had heard about Leah yet. James asked me to review the environmental impact of any future development on the Riverside property. Leah continued. The Blackwood Plan would destroy critical wetlands, disrupt wildlife migration patterns, and create serious flood risks for existing neighborhoods. Crane stood up. We have environmental approval. From a state office that rubber stamps these applications, Leah shot back. Have you done soil studies, water table analysis, traffic impact assessment? Those aren't required for preliminary approval. They should be required for basic human decency. I watched the faces in the crowd. People were starting to look uncertain. The Blackwood Plan had sounded good when it was all about jobs and tax revenue, but environmental destruction and flood risks hit closer to home. What's your alternative? Bill Murray asked me. I looked at Leah, who nodded encouragingly. Sustainable mixed-use development. Housing that families can actually afford, not just luxury condos. Commercial space for local businesses, not chain stores that'll kill downtown. And environmental design that works with the landscape instead of destroying it. Sounds expensive, someone called out. It's profitable, I said. I've built 3 similar projects in Colorado. They're all successful both financially and environmentally. How do we know this isn't just another outsider coming in with big promises? This from Mrs. Chen, who taught me in 4th grade. Because I'm not an outsider, I grew up here. I learned construction working summers for my dad. And I'm not going anywhere this time. Old Mr. Peterson raised his hand. What about jobs Blackwood's promising hundreds of construction jobs? Sustainable development takes longer to build, which means more construction jobs, not fewer. And they're jobs that go to local contractors who understand the area, not some crew that Blackwood brings in from out of state. The tide was starting to turn. I could see it in people's faces. But Olivia wasn't finished. This is all very idealistic, she said. But Ethan doesn't have the capital for a project like this. Blackwood has financing in place. They can start immediately. She was right about the capital. Even with the inheritance, I didn't have enough cash for a major development project. That's when Leah spoke up again. Actually, we do have backing. I stared at her. This was news to me. Before James died, he'd been in talks with Green Valley Investment Group. They specialize in sustainable development projects. I spoke with them yesterday. They're very interested in funding the right kind of project. You spoke with investors, I whispered to her. I called them after the will reading. Your father had already done most of the groundwork. Bill Murray looked around the room. Well, this complicates things considerably. I think we need to table this vote pending further review. Absolutely not, Crane said. Blackwood has deadlines to meet. We need approval tonight, or we'll have to consider other locations. Then consider other locations, I said, because this land isn't going to be destroyed on my watch. The council voted to postpone the decision for 2 weeks, giving both sides time to present detailed proposals. As people filed out of the chamber, I felt a hand on my shoulder. That was well done, son. I turned to see Tom Bradley, Dad's oldest business partner. Tom, I didn't know you were here. Wouldn't miss it. Your father would be proud of how you handled yourself tonight. You think so? I know so. He talked about that presentation you gave 5 years ago, right up until the day he died. Said it was the smartest thing anyone had ever proposed for this town. As we walked out into the parking lot, Leah fell into step beside me. So, she said, think we can pull this off? Honestly, I have no idea. We've got 2 weeks to put together a comprehensive development plan that beats Blackwood's proposal. Good thing we make a good team. I looked at my half-sister, this woman I'd known for less than a week who'd just committed us both to the biggest project of our lives. Yeah, I said, I think we do. But as we reached our cars, I saw Olivia and Crane talking intensely near a black SUV. They were planning something, and I had a feeling the real battle was just beginning. The next 2 weeks were a blur of architectural drawings, environmental studies, and sleepless nights. Leah and I worked out of Dad's old office, which felt both fitting and surreal. Maya helped coordinate meetings while juggling her regular job. And slowly, our vision for the Riverside community started taking shape. It wasn't just housing, it was a neighborhood. Solar panels and rain gardens, a community center that doubled as a storm shelter. Walking trails that preserved the existing wetlands, affordable units mixed in with market-rate homes so families wouldn't be segregated by income. It's beautiful, Maya said, looking at our final presentation boards. Your dad would love this. I hope so, I said, because if we lose the council vote tomorrow, Olivia gets what she wants and this land becomes another strip of luxury condos. That's when Leah walked in with news that changed everything. I just got off the phone with Richard Crane, she said. Blackwood is pulling out. What, why? Apparently their environmental permit got revoked. Seems someone filed a complaint with the state about improper wetlands assessment. I stared at her. You filed a complaint. I'm an environmental scientist. It's my job to protect natural resources. She grinned. Plus, I may have mentioned that any development on that land would face years of legal challenges from concerned citizens. So we won, not exactly. Olivia's found a new partner, some local contractor named Pete Morrison. He's promising a scaled-down version of the luxury development. My heart sank. A local contractor would be harder to fight than some outside corporation. People trusted local businesses. But here's the thing, Leah continued. I know Pete Morrison. He did work on my apartment complex last year. He's not a bad guy, just desperate for a big contract. I think we can convince him to work with us instead of against us. The final town council meeting was packed even tighter than the first one. This time, though, I felt prepared. We had detailed plans, environmental impact studies, and financial projections that showed our project would generate more long-term revenue than any luxury development. Pete Morrison presented first. His plan was smaller than Blackwood's, but still focused on high-end housing that most locals couldn't afford. It's a good compromise, he said. Upscale enough to attract new residents, but not so large that it overwhelms the existing community. When it was our turn, I stood up with confidence I didn't know I had. 2 weeks ago, Mrs. Parker said I'd been absent from this community for 5 years, so I couldn't understand what was best for our town. She was right about the first part. I was absent, but not by choice. I looked directly at Olivia. I left because I thought my family didn't want me here. I thought my ideas weren't valued. I thought I had to choose between being myself and being a Parker. The room was dead silent. My father spent the last months of his life trying to fix that mistake. Not just for me, but for my sister Leah, who he'd kept secret because he was ashamed of choices he'd made. And maybe for this whole town, which deserves better than another development that serves rich outsiders instead of the people who actually live here. I gestured to our presentation boards. This isn't just a housing project, it's a community. Starter homes for young families, senior living for people who want to age in place, shops and services within walking distance, green space that works with nature instead of against it. Bill Murray studied our financial projections. The numbers look good, but can you actually deliver this? Green Valley Investment Group has committed $15 million in initial funding, Leah said. We've got architectural firms lined up, environmental consultants standing by, and local contractors ready to begin work. Including me, Pete Morrison said, standing up. After seeing their plans, I'd rather build something meaningful than another cookie-cutter development. The vote wasn't even close. 7-1 in favor of our proposal, with only Councilwoman Davis abstaining because she owned property adjacent to the site. As people filed out congratulating us and asking when construction would begin, I found myself face to face with Olivia. You got what you wanted, she said, but there was no anger in her voice anymore. Just exhaustion. Did I? Because what I wanted was a father who believed in me. I got that, but too late to matter. She looked down at her hands. James talked about you constantly the last few months. Your success in Denver, your projects, your vision. I think I was afraid that if he brought you back, there wouldn't be room for my children. There was always room, Olivia. The problem was you thought love was a limited resource. Maybe I did. She looked up at me. What happens now? With the business? The money? All of it. Now we build something Dad would be proud of. And maybe if you're interested, there's a place for Haley and Aiden in the project. Not as owners, but as people learning what it means to create something instead of just inheriting it. 3 months later, I stood on the Riverside property, with Leah watching the first foundation being poured. Maya had quit her job to become our project coordinator. Haley was working part-time in our office learning project management. Even Aiden had shown up a few times, apparently interested in the construction side of things. Think Dad can see this? Leah asked. I hope so. I think he'd like knowing we figured out how to be siblings. Even though we're both stubborn as hell. Especially because we're both stubborn as hell. That evening, I had dinner with Maya at the same diner where we'd eaten as kids. Halfway through the meal, I pulled out a small box. Maya Elizabeth Chen, I said, will you marry me? She stared at the ring, then at me, then started laughing. Did you just propose to me in Mel's diner? It's where we had our first date, when we were 16 and I was too nervous to order anything but pie. You're still nervous, she pointed out. Terrified, but the good kind of terrified, the kind that means something matters. She said yes, of course. We'd been circling each other for 20 years waiting for the right time. Maybe there's never a right time. Maybe you just have to decide that love is worth the risk. A year later, the first families moved into Riverside Community. Mixed-income housing that actually worked with solar panels and community gardens and kids playing in streets designed for safety instead of speed. Leah opened an environmental consulting firm downtown. Haley graduated college and joined our development company full-time. Aiden surprised everyone by becoming a skilled carpenter and starting his own green building business. Even Olivia found her place. She turned out to have a talent for interior design, and now she helps families furnish their new homes affordably. We're not a perfect family. We probably never will be. But we're a real family which is messier and more complicated and infinitely more valuable than perfect. Sometimes I drive by Dad's grave and tell him about the latest project, the latest challenge, the latest small victory. I think he'd be proud of what we've built. Not just the buildings, but the relationships, the second chances, the proof that it's never too late to choose love over fear. The legacy my father left me wasn't money or property. It was the understanding that family isn't about blood or law or who gets invited to which meetings. It's about showing up for each other, especially when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. I'm Ethan Parker, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the greatest inheritance is the chance to build something better than what came before.